So, Nikos, I realized I've been knowing you for 10 years now. And I think part of the foresight work that I did was a lot of it was in connection with you on the other side of things, as I met you working with the DG for Research and Innovation. But of course, your experience it's much more ample than these 10 years that I've known you. After decades of being invested in policy work and foresight work, if you are to look today at the practice and the field of foresight, what do you think of it? Like, what do you think it has to offer that other approaches don't?
And one of the things I see is many, many, many more people being involved, saying that they practice foresight, discussing the future, and so on. And that is pleasing uh, because we were in a world where people would actually think that the future would be pretty much like the present, maybe a bit worse as they get older. Um, so I see a lot happening, and I'm glad a lot is happening. Now, why is this happening? And there may be many reasons why different people appreciate this. The things I think it has to offer have to do with uh, basically being a space that makes people appreciate relativism, appreciate what's the word? The level of assumptions we make, appreciate the role that imagination plays in the things we think we know. These are the things that I think made me, these are the things that foresight offered to me. And I hope that this is what people find. Uh,
Mhm. If I gather well, it provides a sort of, it invites to a certain awareness on how we think and how we play with thoughts regarding the future. This awareness you like.
Well, i- in everything we know, imagination plays a huge role. People tend to think that, I maybe revert that critique. Uh, in a lot of science and in our knowledge, there is a strong assumption that the world is the way it should be. And so we study how it is and we uncover the laws that make it be the way it is. And since it's a matter of the law, the world is the way it should be. Uh, but a lot of the things we think we know in the way the world is are come from our imagination. Uh, we have an imaginary of a molecule in our head, and we go back to that imaginary every time we think about molecules. And most people, myself included, and I hope you as well, have never seen a molecule because we cannot see molecules, they're too small. Yeah. So we imagine them. And a lot of what we think we know is part of an imaginary. And when you think, how do I learn from the future? You realize two things. One is that you learn from the future all the time. You know, I predict that there will be no bomb landing here where I'm sitting, and so I'm here sitting talking to you. There is a lesson from the future. And the way in which we learn from the future is very similar from the way in which we learn from the past. We make some imaginary, we plug it in a model, and we create kind of conclusions about what should happen. Yeah. Uh, so this idea that a lot of the things I know are imaginary is really destabilizing and really liberating at the same time. But it's one that can get you out of the conversation that the world is the way it should be, so why do you want to change it? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that, and I think it's something very true that even what we call the most palpable and current reality is weaved out of dreams and imaginations. It's a concoction of dreams that we put together. Okay, at least foresight does it transparently. Like it says we are looking at a dream of a future.
Well, typically you're not looking at a dream, you're looking at multiple dreams about the future. But
Multiple ones. Yeah.
you know that in physics there is a strong discussion about whether the future exists or not. You know, if time is a dimension, then
Yes.
you know what comes before and what comes after depends on the position of the observer. So this could be reversed.
Now I mean, knowing your, first of all, your long experience in the field. With probably you've been excited by it, sometimes disheartened, sometimes critical of the field itself. Um, Having this experience, how do you look at foresight, and where do you feel it is ripe with ethical tensions, whether it's about the process of how foresight is conducted or the way it engages with different topics? What do you feel it's most at stake nowadays in ethical terms?
Um, okay, this was a very complex question, Bianca.
Let's crack it open.
Yeah, my my idea of basically anything I consider as ethics involves some foresight. Is if I do this, then that will happen in the future. And because that is good, then what I'm doing is good. Or because that is bad, then what I'm doing is bad. Yeah. So foresight is a very, very present thing in ethics. Um, Now, uh, what are the biggest challenges that we face that involve the future? Collectively, I think most people would agree that climate change and the biodiversity crisis are the most important challenge that we face. Some people may think that nuclear disaster and war are the most important challenges that we face. Some people may think that overpopulation is the most important challenge that we face, and all these are connected in various um, manifestly uncomfortable futures, and most people believe that we're heading towards a manifestly uncomfortable future. So these are the big challenges. Um, I always have a thought in the back of my mind that hormones basically play a role in this. I remember
Oh,
my parents telling me, uh, you know, 60 years ago, well, no, 50 years ago, that, the world is now far more difficult than it was when we were young. And at that time, I was thinking, nonsense, the world is very easy. So now I am saying this sort of things, and it could well be have something to do with the way we perceive the world as we grow older. Uh, but those are the challenges. And the challenges are, at the end of the day, they are moral challenges. They are challenges of should we be having more or less children? Should we be eating more or less meat? Should we be burning more or less fossil fuels? Should we be taking holidays? Should we be doing the things we're doing? Should we be doing different things? Yeah,
mhm.
I don't know if I covered your question.
No, indeed. I mean, these I feel are territories that are ripe with tensions or the ethics of long-term futures. And I think we can spend a bit more time on, let's start with sustainability or climate or whatever planetary boundaries, all these neighboring topics. Because I'm interested in what can foresight do to revive the interest or the responsibility in these topics? Because I feel while for so much time sustainability has been so high on the agenda, at least at European level, it has produced both fatigue, disengagement. Many people tend to be just done with the subject, cannot take it anymore. And it's a pity. At the same time, I wonder if foresight is particularly placed, or maybe not, or along other ways, to change the gaze on this subject and to really challenge assumptions and allow people to join this conversation in a way that is not I don't know, entrapped in guilt and shame and doing like this, that you're doing it wrong. Can it be done?
Um, Okay. Sustainability is a sort of moral compromise.
Mhm.
It's a moral compromise between those who believe that the purpose in life is making money and making more money, and those who believe that the purpose in life i- i- is some sort of different. It's the growth as the source of as the only objective versus societal well-being as an objective. And those who believe that conserving nature is something that's a very important value, and those who believe that we should actually be exploiting nature as much as we can for our personal benefit. There are these sort of beliefs that are packaged together in this idea of sustainability. So, sustainability as a concept has at least two fundamental flaws. One is that it doesn't say whether everything that is sustainable gets sustained. Yeah. Are you sustainable? Am I sustainable? Yeah. But does that mean that I will live forever? Well, no. Then the question is not really whether I am sustainable. The question is what happens at the end. Yeah. So the sustainability question is one of survival. Is not okay. Now we're sustainable, therefore we may well die. No. So as a frame, it has one fundamental problem in this. The other thing is that it doesn't specify what needs to be sustained. And this was the magic of its creation. The reason it created this wonderful compromise between the different strands was that it didn't have to say what is to be sustained. It has to be sustained to be of use to future generations. And of course, future generations of what? Are we talking about future generations of arachnids? Are we talking about future generations of elephants? Or are we talking, or who is the player in this field? Yeah. Uh, so, uh, in a way, it got a lot of political mileage out of achieving a compromise and making sure that, polluting is not such a bad thing after all. Yeah. Creating a space where that could accommodate the moralities of all those different communities. Um, but at the same time, it reached a point at which it is completely pointless. It involves completely pointless discussions about whether we will have electric cars or not. Uh, when in some islands in the Pacific, what's the point of having electric cars when in 10 years' time they'll be all underwater? Let's bring electric cars there. Uh, the conversation is about different things. Um, so I am not sure that I would want foresight to revive the conversations about sustainability if the conversations are, oh, yes, let's have a sustainability strategy that would allow us to sell more toilet paper. Um, the conversation is about strategies for a living space on the planet and about ethical life, what it means to live your life ethically. Those are conversations that I would want to revive. The conversation about these sort of packages that actually take our eyes off the real problems, I think are not worth reviving. Now, what can foresight do? Well, foresight can offer a space where the conversation of what is the real problem actually happens. Yeah. Okay, how imagine that we have this sustainability strategy with all its bells and whistles and the new technologies and the new this and the new that and so on. What happens? What are the problems that we solve? What are the problems that remain unsolved? Yeah.
So you say that um, the discourse around sustainability, which has embedded political agenda, economic interests, is obscuring more real questions or more real subjects.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and if you were to wrap it in a sentence, you would say, what would it be to live ethically on Earth? That's what you said. You said would be a
The,
question we should face more.
the real question is, what do we want to keep alive? Or what is it that we don't care about? What happens to the things that we don't care about? Do they deserve to be there, or do we just annihilate them? Yeah. Uh, these are the true questions are, okay, what do we do? What is the good thing? What is the right thing to be doing? As a, I was listening to something George Monbiot said in an interview. He said, I wake up every morning trying to do the right thing, thinking it's really difficult to try to do the right thing. Um, you don't know most of the times what the right thing to do is. Yeah. So it's very, very difficult. But that's what life is about. It's about doing the right thing.
Yes, I'm wrapping my mind around it. Um, because I'm trying to understand whether, I mean, the fatigue around the discourse I understand very much myself, and I see it in society as well. If we were to strip the subject from this unnecessary heavy language that is so tied up with policies and with all sorts of agendas at different levels, we would still reach, I assume, some of the subjects that have to do with, as you said, loss of biodiversity, the state of the waters and the soils, the way the food we eat. I mean, it will still boil down to some of the building blocks that are already in the discourse of sustainability. As in, if you wash away the Brussels, you are left with some very important subject for life on Earth, right? Air, soil, food, biodiversity, everything. What kind of fresh, I don't know, stamina can foresight bring in cracking open these questions? Or maybe it's not foresight's place. We don't want to burden it with all the
No,
obligations.
I think that it is foresight's place because foresight makes space for conversations that wouldn't happen otherwise. When you discuss history, there's a great deal of guilt involved. Um, when you discuss the future, the conversation becomes about how can I compensate for the guilt I feel. Hmm?
Mhm.
And so it is a space where exactly this sort of things can play. One of the things that I have become very conscious of is how important in my life have been behaviors that I learned as a very young person in the family and at home, and how difficult it is to understand that those behaviors are now bad behaviors. You know, we all did, we all learned a great deal of things that if we think about sustainability and ethical life on the planet, are actually wrong things to be doing. Mm. And yet, many people of my age still throw plastic bottles out of their car windows as they drive through the countryside. Because when they did it as a kid, it was all right. It was something that everybody did. So what's the problem with that? Yeah. But it is actually extremely difficult to go back and say, well, okay, I have these habits. I've been doing it for 50 years, but it's wrong. And now I'm going to change it. And once you start doing this, you find that there's a hell of a lot of things that you do that are wrong and that you need to change. This is why I said that waking up every morning thinking, okay, I'm gonna wake up and I'll do the right thing is a very, very, very heavy and difficult decision. It's a difficult thing. So, in foresight, you can have these sort of discussions much easier. Um, One of the big debates is about guilt in this space, is about um, whether people can understand that they need to abandon things, that they need to stop being able to throw plastic bottles out of their car windows. Yeah. Uh, I have the right to do this and I have had it for 60 years. How can you tell me that I shouldn't be doing this? And foresight is a space where you can discover it through your own thoughts rather than somebody telling you you need to do this because scientists say that the right thing to do. After all, 40 years ago, scientists were saying that smoking was a good thing. That was probably 60 years ago, but there were scientists saying that smoking was a good thing. Uh, so yes, foresight can be a space in which you discover assumptions that you have been making, and you start understanding how different imaginaries could lead to different forms of ethical behaviors, and in the end, discover what the right thing to do is.
Mhm. Yeah, without being told from above and castigated like a small child. Yeah, that might bring some comfort that you're investigating your own assumptions rather than being told what to do. If we were to keeping this attention on how what foresight can or can't do, um, if we are to move from this topic of huge topic of sustainability to another of your favorites, which is techno-fixism. And I remember from many of our conversations related to projects we did together that you were very vigilant on not having too much of a techno-optimist view in the reports or in the scenarios that we did, and I mean that stayed with me for quite a while. Um, do you feel it's a permanent slippery slope, so to say, or there is always the possibility that foresight becomes too attached to the technical possibilities of the future?
Okay, the fundamentals of what is a techno-fix and how it emerges in life. Um, we take people through universities and postgraduate studies and PhDs and postdoctorates to basically train them that the question is more important than the answer. Yeah, that's the
Yes.
basic training is that if you ask the right questions, you start approaching knowledge. If you don't ask the right questions, then you don't approach knowledge. You may get away from it. But this notion that there is something called knowledge, there are these things we learn, and we learn them by asking the right questions. So a lot of the training is about asking the right questions. And then these people get jobs and they get an answer, and with that answer, they try to answer all questions. There are strategic planning is one of my favorite ones. You know, what is your problem? Don't worry, strategic planning will solve it, no matter what your problem is. information technology is another one of those. What's your problem? Don't worry, information technology will solve it. Yeah.
It's a hammer of sorts, right? It's a hammer and you see
Yeah.
nails.
Yeah. But uh, this is the opposite of knowledge is I have this solution that fixes all problems. I'm selling it, you give me money, I give you the solution, it will fix your problem. And of course, as you know from knowledge, from questions and answers, uh, by providing an answer, you simply change the question. There is
Yeah.
a shift in there. So what happens is that many of the new questions generated are rather uncomfortable. And this is where you get into the discussion about technology assessment and so on. But the root of the problem is the belief that technology has its own logic. And because it has its own logic, this logic comes from Mother Nature and it is undeniable, and this is the way things will go. Um, this is a wonderful device for domination, whereby the people exercising the domination do not take responsibility for the evils that domination brings because these come from Mother Nature, because technology follows its own logic and they just so happen to be there. Uh, and this is what's bad with technological determinism. If you want, technological determinism is in many ways the enemy. This idea that technology has its own logic uh, and it determines things. Once technology is out there, you cannot resist. The force is undeniable. It has become part of the laws of nature. And if you don't abide with the laws of nature, nature puts you in prison. And of course, it does away with your ability to put the perpetrators in prison. Yeah, because it's not my fault, technology does it. So, uh, therefore, the techno-fix and technological determinism are extremely powerful forces in society that if we want to have ethical living need to be weakened and put aside. So we need to insist that there are people's choices and it's the people's choices that matter. And the conversation in sociology is slightly more complex than that, but this is where it ends. That's where it ends. The problem is that we have people that bring in things for which they don't have any responsibilities. I use the metaphor of uh, the weapons builders of emperors. So those who produce technologies are building weapons, and because they build them for the emperor, they are completely innocent when it comes to taking any responsibility for the use of those weapons. Yeah.
I mean, I understand your critique of not letting technological determinism skew our attention from the root of the problems or the challenges that we are trying to tackle in society, correct? Like
Mhm.
don't let pre-cooked solutions replace the initial question, which is what is the right thing to do to address a certain pain or relieve a certain ailment or problem in society. This I perfectly understand and I agree with you. I'm what is the I don't know the decent or well thought of approach to not reject the possibilities that technologies bring, but not be obscured by them or be brainwashed by them in foresight practice. How do you reach a balance where they can be part of the solution to some of the struggles of contemporary society, but don't
Okay.
consider them gods?
I have possibly a slightly different view of what a technology is than what you uh,
Mhm.
think, Bianca. Uh, in my vocabulary, technology is the way we do things. Yeah. And that may or may not involve tools. So the how may be associated with the using a tool. And there's a big discussion in literature about the tools and whether they need to be convivial or how tools configure users, the agency of tools and what have you. But there is a great deal of technology also in laws and in recipes. You put 20 grams of this in water and you boil it and so on. All this, there's a great deal of technology in habits. There's a great deal of technology in the way we deal with our bodies. There is technology everywhere. So technology
Yeah.
is not an enemy. Technology is how we do things. Uh, the enemy is the idea that the way we do things cannot be changed for reasons that have to do with natural laws. Because when we realize that the way we do things is not right, then we have to change it. Um, and it's pretty normal. So I am completely open to any form of tooling and technology for as long as we are conscious of what we do and we take our responsibilities. Yeah. It's not, in a way, in the history of technology, there is a wonderful defining period that has to do with the revolution of the Luddites. Um, um, which is basically up to that point, how we did things in the factories was decided by the people who lived in the factory. And then companies developed corporate labs and governments started having their own labs. And then how we did things in the factory would be defined by a person in a white coat who came from somewhere else.
Mhm.
And this meant that the people of the factory lost a very important element of life, which was controlling how we do things. From now on, we do things the way they say rather than the way we did things. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are the sources of the way we do things? Somebody produced a law that things should be done this way, and we've been doing it this way for 150 years. Well, yeah, but this way may not be a good way. Now let's change it.
Mhm. So it's not, yeah, it's not a rage against the machines, but rather vigilance towards agency being displaced. Like
Well,
they
yeah,
were felt being stripped of their own agency.
yeah, yeah. But the general idea is that we need to behave responsibly, and in order to behave responsibly, we need to be aware to the extent possible of the implications of the choices we make. And the more we make those choices rather than somebody else, the more challenging it is to make them because it's very easy to go, oh, yes, this person brought this machine, why don't we buy it and then we adjust around it, yeah, and things will be fine. Uh, it's much more challenging to start thinking, okay, what is it in the way we do things that's wrong? How can we improve this and so on? But that conversation creates much more responsibility in relation to the choices of technologies. And in that conversation, you can address things like the life of insects around the factory, um, which would be completely irrelevant to somebody coming from somewhere else. So you can have a richer and a better conversation.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
yeah,
so, yeah,
it makes
foresight and
sense.
technology. In a way, much of the discussion in foresight and technology is a bit reductionist and goes very often into technological determinism. There are these options, and we have to pick between one of them, and we are something, and so on. All these become modeled uh, elements of a decision-making tree as opposed to conversations in the lives of people that matter and that where people decide in some democratic way.
Mhm. And I think this, what you say, stays true for different domains in the sense that and technology and the way we do things is one of them. But the quality of attention that foresight gives towards really challenging underlying system and assumptions brings kind of its value, rather the way even more important than the outcomes of a certain scenario or a certain imagined future. I think it's a yeah, the gist of it is in how the process manages to disrupt some of the assumptions or some of the underlying convictions that we have about how we do things, if I understand correctly.
Exactly. Well, the value is in revisiting assumptions, and it's a difficult thing, so you should, in a way, not expect much. If you approach foresight with a lot of expectations that this will reveal to me the real future and so on, you get into completely, you get into
Disillusionment.
barrels from which you cannot escape. It's good to approach it without much expectation. Um,
And hopefully be pleasantly surprised by what the process can do. Um, Speaking of the way we do things as a technology, let's spend just a bit on how the way we do foresight might change quite a lot in light of the new AI-enabled tools. So we see it already, and we shiver a bit, right? How much content can be produced very fast, whether it's horizon scanning or scenario development, all these recipes that we thought are very close to our expertise and what we bring forth. This will definitely change how we do foresight. What I'm not at all suggesting that you should know by now what is to be done, but rather what invitation does this open towards the foresight practitioners? As in, it's a moment, it makes us nervous. But if we were to pause the nervousness and think, well, wait a minute, maybe we need to sit a bit like this, or we need to do something differently, what would your intuition be about that?
this is a difficult one. My starting thought is that the uh, it's the question that matters and not the answers. So AI can synthesize answers incredibly quickly, but they don't matter. What matters is the question. Um, Now, there are many clients who engage in foresight for answers. Yeah.
Mhm.
And in a way, those clients can get their answers from ChatGPT much easier than doing a foresight process involving their staff and so on. Um, but then that foresight process would be almost entirely impactless. Yeah. You would know some answers that would be relatively or completely meaningless. Um, how do I say that? When I speak about foresight, one of the things I say is, do you really want to know the future? Because if you think that you're doing foresight to know the future, then ask yourself, do you really want to know the future? because anything you know about the future restricts your freedom. Anything you know becomes part of the way the world is, which
Yeah,
will never
it
change.
changes you. Yeah.
Yeah. So foresight is not about knowing the future. It's about realizing what questions you should be asking about the future. Yeah. Uh, and there, uh, I find it interesting because the AI tools are also good at asking questions. They're not only answer providers. Um, so there is a potential discussion. Okay, what questions should I be asking about the future? In fact, I had this conversation with a model, and I found its reply really good and interesting. But in that sense, they can challenge and compete and at the end of the day, improve the foresight services that the foresight community offers. Yeah. Because you say, okay, I'm asking these questions about the future. You tell the client, are you happy with them? They go, well, actually, Claude gave me these questions, which I think are better. Yeah. And then you say, well, okay, are you sure that these are the good questions? Can we do a workshop on these? And so they can go, what is the point in having a workshop? Then the point of the workshop becomes more explicitly about including people, about democracy, about decision-making structures, as opposed to having this pretense that it's the scenario that really matters. Once we see the scenarios, we put them in a computer, and the computer gives us an answer, and that is the answer forever. And so it's a very interesting thing, this AI thing.
But if following this thread that it becomes more obvious, then the quality of the questions is far more important than whatever outcome and little report that we come out with. And even in the space of asking good questions, AI can prove to be more enlightened than human questioners. I still think this leaves a bit of space of so good question. AI can even help with setting the territory of questions. But to make those questions alive for a group of people at the same time, possibly in the same room, to keep them in a certain form of engagement, honest engagement, critical view of critical gaze. I think I hope that that's something that is left for us. As in, even if the questions can be suggested by someone that has access to much more information and can pose better questions, the way we play and dance around those questions is still a human affair, I think, or I hope.
Well, unless we can put ChatGPT in jail for all the damage it causes, yeah? That's the technological determinist critique. The way um, the way we make decisions is something for which we need to take responsibility. So a use of AI as a decision-making tool uh, must bring responsibility to somebody who can get punished for making decisions in a manifestly wrong way, huh? Or who can basically take responsibility for the decisions, whatever that means. So it 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 can it has an incredible tendency there is an incredible tendency in our systems to attribute responsibility to the tool. Um, Very often in policy discussions, you get a reply, the model got it wrong. So it wasn't me, it was the model. Yeah. Um,
Mhm.
in what way is the model's responsibility to get it right? You're the one who's responsible for getting it right. It's not the model. But by blaming the model, we all escape responsibility. Uh, uh, so the in a way, AI and chatbots are wonderful tools for generating thoughts and generating questions and generating answers and so on. But those matter little or not at all. What actually matters is creating decision-making processes that are inclusive, that listen to various different perspectives, that bring people in, that make people feel that they are part of a community, that they're part of democracy, and so on. And and I think that these parts are pretty safe from AI. It's not. It cannot compete in those terms. Uh, where it can compete is in claims of authority that are based on knowing texts. I mean, Harari makes a good lecture on this. Uh, I disagree with various of the things that he says, but one of the things that he got right is this. He says, you go to the rabbi and you ask for their advice because they have studied the texts. But Claude have studied many
All the
more
things.
texts than the rabbi, so why don't you go to Claude? Okay? So if you put Claude versus the rabbi doesn't stand a chance. If you're talking about answers based on texts. But the rabbi would obviously ask better questions than Claude because for the rabbi, asking the question is the important thing. If the rabbi is really wise and knowledgeable, it's not about the answers, it's about the questions. Uh, so this is uh, this is about the interaction on foresight with AI that I can think. I, I used to have this model of using foresight in my head where I was
Mm.
doing policy. We use foresight as a tick box exercise. That the community loses to Claude or
What kind
ChatGPT.
of exercise?
A tick box. I need, before any decision, I need to tick the box that says I've done foresight. Yeah. So uh, you go, okay, I asked Claude about the future. He or she spoke to me. Tick, we've done it. Uh, then there was one that was, I systematically think about alternative futures. Uh, there again, Claude wins. It can be extremely systematic, and ChatGPT as well. It can be extremely systematic in the way in which it presents futures, and it can think the word alternative and implement it in a where the content matters. It is a very, very, very formidable opponent. So my third one is I use foresight to promote reflexive decision making and to bring in voices that are not typically present in decision making process. This is the thing it cannot do because this has to do with the way in which you and I and we make decisions, the way we do things. Um, so if you want, if we turn this into a model of competition and efficiency and so on, uh, those futurists who sell content will be subjected or are already possibly subjected to the level of competition that says you're not outcompeted by AI, but you're competed by the consultant with AI, uh, which soon will be you're actually outcompeted by AI itself. And
It's
there is
it's
no such thing as a consultant using AI. We ask AI directly and it tells us. Uh, but the ones that are about real change and implementation of democracy and good social deliberation and good ethical practice and so on, those will not be outcompeted by AI or consultants with AI.
yeah.
Not
I,
yet.
I mean, I say yes, and I'm trying to both convince myself and have yeah have faith that this is the case. But it makes sense because you mentioned that the I don't know the juices of deliberation and thinking together involves um, bringing voices that are usually not around decision making. Let's spend a bit of time on that because both you and I know there are so many ways in which foresight tries to become, well, I know, more inclusive, more participatory, gamified, if you want, or um, opening up to new communities. It's not easy, or for me, I feel it's not easy. If you don't just want to tick a box, as you said, if you don't want to make it in a tokenistic gesture of, oh, now we are participatory. Let's spend a bit of thought on this. How do you do participatory process well? Like what does it take? Um,
Um, well, obviously, it takes reflection and it takes asking and it takes thinking about what you're trying to do and so on. Um, I'll get you to one very specific thing I learned through foresight. I remember this person saying, I was in a meeting where people were discussing about migration and security and the influence of climate change. And I was really surprised that all these people were talking about other people migrating. It
Mhm.
wasn't going through their heads that they may be the ones who may be migrating. Yeah. And I thought, this is a classic case of we do a participatory foresight that discusses migration, but the only people excluded are those really concerned, the migrants. We have all the other stakeholders whose aim is to stop people from moving.
or to manage them, yeah, yeah. If
Well,
not downright stop,
yeah,
yes.
there are lots of interesting contradictions in the migration form. One is that people object to economic migration of poor people, but they really love the economic migration
Welcome.
of rich people. Yeah, so business travelers are welcome, but laborers, no, 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 their business is not worth having, uh, kind of thing.
And also,
But
they are not called migrants; they are called expats if they are if they
yeah,
are
yeah,
rich and business
yeah,
people.
cosmopolitan or whatever. Yes. Uh, but the point is who is included and why is this legitimate? So in participatory foresight, an important thought should be spared on who do we include. Uh, and the advice is when you think that you have involved everybody concerned, add a few more communities just for the fun of it. Yeah, this is sort of you may discover that people are concerned in ways that you hadn't anticipated. Uh, but that's the only advice I can give on how to do good participatory foresight is try and bring all sorts of people in. I mean, I, this is it's a true story. We were discussing the best practice in foresight, and the office of Singapore, the Singapore office building, were saying that they put a great deal of effort in talking to dissidents. And
Dissidents.
dissidents, yes, people. Now, Singapore is not the Singapore government is not one that tolerates dissidents. So supposedly they would go to prison to find them, but uh, they were making a very important point about how systematic and obsessive they were about discussing with dissidents. I thought this is a good principle. It's a sort of I will find even my biggest enemies and try to bring them in and hear what they have to say. You know,
Yeah, even the most uncomfortable of voices,
yes,
you
yes.
say. Um, I mean, in some cases, just as you gave the example of migration, sometimes it begs kind of for this reality check. Have you brought to the table people that are most affected by this phenomena you're trying to make sense of? Whereas other themes are so broad, so transversal that pretty much is relevant for everyone, as in it gets to the point that participatory means my grandma and yours and different workers and different kinds of migrants. So some are not so easy to circumscribe. Um,
Okay, I'll give you a historical fact, which I
mm,
believe to be true, although I've only read it in books. I wasn't around. In ancient Athens, when the demos was meeting, the quorum was reached with 6,000 people present. And in order to make sure that poor people were represented, the first 6,000 to turn up were getting paid.
okay.
Okay. Now, I'm used to meetings of 7, 10, 20 people. So when I imagine 6,000 people having a meeting, my mind doesn't, there's no space for it. But there are techniques. They managed it. Yeah. And, that was 2,500 years ago. So,
But the magic word seems to be you pay them.
um,
Or there is a form of reward for engagement.
well, that is magic because in contemporary democracies, in our democracies, poor people are completely disenfranchised and they don't even vote. We had a lot of projects in the funded a lot of projects in the commission which were trying to build civic dialogues with poor people.
Mhm.
And they found it quite challenging. They did it, and they did various of those projects were quite wonderful, but it is challenging. And one of the things they were saying was exactly what you said, that you actually need to find a way of giving them something, and then they turn up.
Now, to make things more complicated in terms of participation, we discussed until now like how to expand the circle of participation, but nowadays in foresight we are more and more preoccupied with including the invisible, almost as in future generations or unborn generations, not include them literally, but consider them as an entity in the discussion, or non-human beings or faraway spaces. Now this adds a lot of complications to our work. How can this be done meaningfully, in the sense that how can you open the sensibility and the sensitivity of someone to care for the unborn children of their children, um, for sentient or non-sentient beings that have no resemblance to what they consider to be a stakeholder in the game? It's quite a tall order to make people become more sensitive towards so many things.
Well, the only thing I would disagree with you is that the right framing is that you have to make people. No, no. Other than that, it is a huge challenge to think, okay, what does the rock want? And what's the tree telling me? Yeah. These are big challenges. Um, there are some cultures that claim that talk to rocks and trees and that have a
Yes.
much better connection with the natural world than we, the sort of city dwellers of the West, have. Uh, so there is a lot in foresight about relations with indigenous knowledges and how to bring these concerns in the conversation. I think the conversation will forever be about with people, and it will be forever with people who are present. You cannot escape this. I mean, okay, there are apps that allow you to talk to your cat, but I don't think that
Yeah, it's not about that, definitely.
it's not about cats. Um, the interesting thing about future generations is the demographic discussion. In a way, future generations was one of the rhetorical tricks of achieving the definition of sustainability. And uh, as what was the statistic I read that brings the point home? In South Korea, for every 100 people of childbearing age alive now, there will be 12 grandchildren. So the future generations are much smaller than you think. Yeah. So the conversation that's more important is about future generations of trees, future generations of rabbits, future generations of elephants. It's the conservation part of the discussion. Uh, and I think that it is important to bring voices that have a stake in or an ethic in conservation. Um, and that I'm saying because very often the discussions about the future are about wiping out the past. Yeah. We will build this shiny city that will eliminate all the sand. And it's actually worth asking, okay, what does the sand have to say about this? Why is this? Why should we be the masters of this? And do we all agree that the sand should disappear and be replaced by this, or is there anybody who has a problem with it? Um, so it's about
So what yeah.
it's
What lands on me is that in a way this invitation to consider unborn generations or non-human beings is more of a permission slip, actually, as in you kind of make space in your mind to not go ahead with your narrative as it is, as in crack it open a few times, even if just as a mental experiment or as a permission slip to consider that it could be otherwise or it could be different from what you think is so real now.
uh, I started my career in foresight by telling people that if they think about the future, they will be more able to control it, which is a statement which I still consider true. So I was going around saying, you need to think about the future because if you don't think about the future, don't worry, the Chinese are thinking about it. So the future that we'll have will come from China. Are you happy with that? No, 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 I need to think about the future. Uh, I ended my career saying, now that you thought about the future, be very sensitive because this future that you're thinking about doesn't belong to you, it belongs to everybody. So whatever control you think you have, do not exercise it. The right thing to do is to have a decision-making process that does not allow you to control the future. Because
Mhm.
it's our future, yeah, and it's our future in a very, very broad way. So this is how I ended up with the ethics question. It's sort of, okay, now that I control the future, what do I do? Just like Spider-Man, I say that the superpower is a great responsibility. It's a great power, and the great power is a great responsibility, and I become a responsible decision maker. And what this means is that I become part of a decision-making structure that reflects the way our democracy works, or our community, or our demos, our collective existence. I'm not doing it for selfish reasons and from a selfish perspective, uh, kind of thing. And this is how the conversation goes to admittedly small communities of indigenous people that still survive, who actually operate in ways that we may or may not recognize as democratic. and claim that in their spiritual practices they have good relations with the other beings of that inhabit the same spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, now that you say, I'm even more interested in discussing with someone that does that kind of work. We learn, we live and learn. I think this would be my final question, which is having said all this, if you were um, to instill a kind of change, whether it's attitudinal or behavioral or a change in perspective in how foresight is done, um, how would you want foresight? How would you want to see foresight maturing, growing into a new skin of its own relevance in ethical terms and not only?
Well, I think that foresight should abandon the claim that it is a technique that gives you some sort of truth about the future. Uh, in a way, foresight needs to be a space that fosters democracy, not technocracy. So it's not about experts. It's about recognizing that everybody think about the future and all those thoughts matter. Yeah. Foresight is an innate capacity of all living beings. It's not an instrument of domination. And that our role is not to push it down on the others by claiming that we are the ones who are responsible for the future. Our role is quite the opposite, is to make the point that this exists and this needs to be part of the way we do things, the way we make decisions, the way our democracies operate, and so on and so forth.
I like that. And I believe it. Not only that I like that, it sounds good. I think you're right. It's quite a shift from, I don't know, expertise and doing things and serving strategic planning to forget about that. It's about opening up in a way that really is inclusive and taps into different forms of experience, intelligence, desires, fears. Yeah, that changes the bar and raises it at the same time.
Good.
Good, yes, good. Because I still have 30 years of work, so good.